Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where the topic is the essential steps to managing resources in an adaptive project management world. My name is Doug Welsby, and I'm also joined by my colleagues, Jim Patterson and Paul Estabrooks. During today's webinar, attendees will be on mute and the line will not be open for questions. However, feel free to use the GoToWebinar question feature to submit questions. I'll address these during the webinar and will respond via email if we do not get to your specific question. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no need to worry, as I'll be emailing the link to the presentation once it's been posted to our YouTube channel. I'll now turn the presentation over to Jim.
Thank you, Doug, and welcome everybody. We appreciate you joining us today on this important topic, the essential steps to managing resources in an adaptive project management world. Let's talk about some of the topics we're going to cover today. We're going to go over some resource management concepts and challenges that are being faced in the marketplace today. We'll focus on some prescribed resource management best practices. We'll talk about how the concept of adaptive project management layers into this and supports a variety of execution tools and methods. Then we'll talk about how we manage resource capacity and demand in OnePlan and resource management reporting and analytics. We're going to focus most of that topic area on the demonstration of the solution that Paul will be giving us later on. Then we'll come back and wrap up with a summary and next steps and some offers that we have for those that have registered and attended for this today. So not to get too 101 on this, but what is resource management as we're defining it? And it really is defined as the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. Pretty basic. But why do we even want to do this? It's really to achieve the benefits that are promised if we do it well. One is to provide requisite resource visibility so that we can understand what our resource commitments are and do we have the wherewithal to do the things that we're committing to. It also helps us to increase business value because we can help better ensure that we're placing our valuable resources on the right things that drive the most business value for our organizations. It also helps us save time and money by being more efficient in the way that we deploy resources and avoid waste and duplication. It also can help increase our project success rates because if we actually make commitments in our projects based upon realistic ability to supply resources to our projects, we're going to have more on-time and on-budget deliveries because we are making our plans with more reasonable assumptions. It also gives us the ability to better accommodate demand and make decisions on where we can't say yes to demand. And also just employee satisfaction. If we don't tackle resource management in a sane way, we can end up with employee burnout, dissatisfaction, and ultimately in high turnover of valuable resources if we keep burning people too hard for too long. So just some real concepts and benefits that we get out of embarking upon a resource management discipline. So what are some of the resource management challenges in specific areas? One is resource ownership, especially in matrix organizations today. Projects and project organizations are often have demand for resources and requesting resources that actually have to come from functional or resource management organizations that then have to allocate or provide the resources that are being requested. And that resource ownership can provide challenges or barriers to productive execution. Resource focus. Having a focus on that there is a resource dimension in this is one aspect of that. And also the fact is when resources get work coming at them from a lot of different directions, how do they prioritize and where do they focus their time? What's more important than what? And sometimes that's a challenge in organizations when people are getting hitting from a variety of different directions. A non-project workload. In organizations that have operational work streams and resources that participate in operational and project work, non-project workload, especially operational things, can often take precedence and divert resources from project-specific work and impact our ability to complete those projects. Also, resource tracking. We may plan and have assumptions on our resources, but where are resources actually spending their time? And are we fulfilling and spending resources to the degree that we thought we were? Or is it taking more or less time than we thought? That tracking piece is a piece that people oftentimes have a challenge with beyond just the planning or the allocating of the resources. Overall resource visibility, we talked about that up front in the first slide, but not having visibility into how resources are planning to be deployed and how they're actually being deployed impact our ability to make informed decisions or making the right decisions on corrective actions in our projects and our resource deployments. Also, manual reporting. Many organizations today are doing resource management and reporting on these things in a very manual fashion, meaning they're using a variety of spreadsheets. They're manually mashing up data and then compiling them into forms and formats that people can look at on a reasonable basis and digest. And sometimes these becomes projects in and of themselves and become a very time-consuming piece that can be avoided if we do resource management in a good, orderly, and automated fashion. And resource management is very granular information. It's very time-phased and incremental as far as how we do it. And sometimes it can become an eye chart and just too much information to digest. And so data doesn't become consumable or interpretable information. So being able to transform this into information that we can actually use and interpret and then use for decision support is something that's very key that organizations are striving to do better at today. So 5 resource management steps as we go through and evolve and get better at these things, and using the stepping stones as a graphical here. What we're going to focus on today is where we start with resource capacity. Oftentimes as people embark upon this discipline at a high level, resource capacity of saying, hey, I need these many FTEs of this type of resource or this person on this project is usually a good starting place because it is something that is achievable early on in a resource management maturity journey. Ultimately, resource allocation is going to be, now that we've allocated these resources or resource types to projects, how do we allocate them to the specific discrete pieces of work and tasks so that we actually understand who's doing what specifically within projects? And then embarking upon the resource work management, where we factor in, all the different things that a resource is working on, project and non-project alike, and being able to make decisions and planning and forecasting and tracking based upon a more complete picture of what a resource is working on at any given point in time. Teamwork management is really about team dynamics, and as we get better, especially in dedicated teams in a more agile world, as teams work together more and get more efficiencies, they get better throughput and better velocity as they work through those things. And then personal work management is really just taking it to the next level, that we each personally get better within these processes and become more effective in their ability to provide value to our organizations. Now, the Gartner Group came out in 2018 with a resource maturity model, resource management maturity model. And if you see here in what they call the crawl stage in level 2, it's focused more by the color coding on that resource capacity planning, that higher level planning of resources that we talked about. It's only when they get into maturity level 3 do we start talking about more detailed resource allocations and those types of things. And then moving on into more mature processes in level 4, what they call the run stage. So it is an evolution, and you do not have to tackle all aspects of this to be effective in getting started in your journey and making incremental benefits to your organization in this discipline. Other things to consider in other dimensions, what levels do we want to do and what aspects of this do we want to tackle within our resource management activities? Roles versus resources. Do we plan things from a more generic role basis, just to understand, do we have the wherewithal and the basic capacity to deliver things? A sanity check, are we overcommitting? Or do we want to get down to more detailed specific resource information and individuals that we're going to be tracking against initiatives and project work efforts? That leads to the planning and tracking granularity. How granular do we want to get with this? Do we track roles down to specific skill levels and those types of things? Do we get down to specific individuals, and do we track down at a task level, or do we figure out on fractional FTEs or allocations? Those are decisions that you make based upon your organization and what you think your wherewithal is to sustain and provide this on an ongoing basis and on a consistent basis. We talked about matrixed organizations, that approval negotiation. Do you want to tackle an approval negotiation process where projects request resource types, and then functional and resource managers have to approve and then provide the resources that are being requested? Governance and prioritization. Do we dovetail this with a portfolio management process so that we understand, as we bring in requests for projects or portfolio items, what are the priorities around those? which should get the resources first, and then what things should we do, what shouldn't we do, and how does that impact our resource management landscape. Forecasting versus actuals. Some folks, it's sufficient just to forecast. They want to understand going in a look-ahead fashion, what the demand for the resources would be should we do all these things, both the things that we have in flight and things that are proposed. And that may be good enough for organizations to take a step forward from where they're at today. But in a more mature fashion, you would then track actuals of how we're actually spending those resources and compare those to what the forecast was and make adjustments based upon a more complete picture. And then some folks want to take rates and allocations of cost on these resources and track that to financials as well. So depending on where you're at, you do not have to do all aspects of this to the nth degree, but these are aspects to consider, and are they appropriate for where you're at as an organization and where you want to get to. Ultimately, that capacity planning is more of a top-down planning exercises, where the allocation and the detailed assignment of resources is more bottoms-up. And as we go through this maturity model, ultimately we're going to want to reconcile that top-down with that bottom-up and incorporate them should we want to tackle all these things in our resource management processes. As we look at tying this to the demand and portfolio management, as I mentioned with the governance and prioritization, is that organizations get demand in a lot of different ways, but if we take the concept of ideas and requests that come in, and that whether we make a go, no-go decision on whether or not to pursue that and do a business case, and then have these items as proposed items in a portfolio to marry up with the things that are actively in flight, notice that the bottom path in the blue is really about the resource management, identifying the roles, determine the quantity of each role, identify constraints and things. And then it marries up at that proposed portfolio level. Do we have the resources to do the things we're considering doing? And then match the high level demand to supply, and then have our governance process, whether it's a steering committee or a portfolio group, decide what it is that we're going to actually do, and then we can request those specific resource allocations. So resource management and portfolio management do dovetail in these processes. So if we want to understand resource capacity planning, and we look at the top and bottom triangles, capacity means how many people do I have that I can get to work on projects, and for how much time are they available, and what roles can they play? So what do we have? And then the demand is determining, what's required for each project and initiative we're considering doing. Be able to prioritize those items and then allocate resources based on role and priority till the resources are exhausted. And I don't mean tired, I just mean that we've used them all up. And if we want to marry those things, we have to have some synchronization and have alignment with capacity versus demand in order to get things actually done and not make false commitments. Now, if we look on the left, we want to develop projects based on committed availability, meaning once we decide on a project, let's commit the availability and commit the resources to the things. And then if we want to do this well, don't start projects if resources are unavailable. We're just setting ourselves up for failure or resource frustration and burnout, like we talked about early on. So if you're thinking about tackling and where you're at, think about these factors in resource management next steps for yourself. And it's okay if they're baby steps, like we see in that graphic on the side. Assess your readiness. Really be honest with yourself where you're at. Understand your resource management maturity level. Understand the environment, the culture that you're in, and what can be actually accomplished today versus what's going to be a longer term aspiration. Build a resource management roadmap and then develop a practical action plan to get to that next maturity level. It's about progress, it's not perfection. And then define your process first and then automate it. We don't want to automate something that isn't realistic or try to automate something that doesn't yet exist. So how do resources do this today? Well, surprise, surprise, we typically find that many organizations are still mired in using very highly customized Excel models to do this. And why do they do this? It's freely available. We all know how to use it to some degree. In many cases, we're unaware of maybe more suitable alternatives to help us do this better than in a spreadsheet, because they're very flexible and can be tailored to do the things that we want them to do. But there are downsides to it. One is there's lack of standards. It can be very individual in its nature, and that whole mashing up of data and doing things across the board sometimes can be difficult because it adds a manual layer of rolling these things up. And spreadsheets are very manual and static models. When you do time phase resource planning, it's cell by cell, row by row. And by the time we finish up with an update to those things, it can all almost all already be outdated by the time we finish up. As we all know, it's easy to break formulas and calculations and impact the integrity of the values in the spreadsheet. There's no real dynamic visibility to resource capacity on real resources that actually exist within the organization. And it can be very time consuming on that time phase basis to change things when the situations change and scenarios change that we're trying to address. It's also then disconnected from other project management information, meaning it's a silo of data in and of itself, and it doesn't necessarily help us when we're trying to dovetail this with schedule and timing and execution of the project outside of just the resource management dimension. It doesn't necessarily provide us the visibility insight for overall reporting that we want from a project and portfolio perspective, and there often is no real governance tied to spreadsheets. So these are just some areas that we want to, let's just say, overcome by getting out of the Excel mode. And if we layer in now in this modern age, we're transforming, and there's transformative options for resource management that can accommodate or factor in this new adaptive project management approach that we see more and more organizations dealing with today on a regular basis. And the drivers for that is organizations are shifting to the left, as we call it, and that left is moving to more iterative, agile approaches so that we can actually get results and make decisions faster and deliver things more incrementally. And organizations are going from a more traditional waterfall, traditional quality model to a more of a shift left model. And what that is driving to is that in the availability of cloud tools out there in the marketplace today, you're finding organizations have a increasing proliferation of tools being used by different teams and parts of the organization, meaning it's harder to pull this data together than ever before. In this matrix here, you see different capability areas that organizations are trying to use across maybe the top where you have different organizational units. And this is an example from a client that we got that these are the different tool sets that are being used for these disciplines across just this one organization. And it's a challenge to harness this information in an adaptive world. But the Gartner Group says you don't have to have a homogeneous type of approach to these things. That blend of approaches enables organizational agility, and that most organizations are more likely to use several different project management approaches or even tool sets to be effective because the nature of the work varies and the nature of the challenges vary in different parts of the organizations. So to this end, moving to the left means moving from the more traditional project portfolio management or PPM landscape that's very waterfall and governance driven type of approach. Trying to move all the way to the left to more agile portfolio management, but in the middle, whether it is a transitionary period where an organization trying to move all the way to the left is going to have some combination of agile and waterfall and different methods, that adaptive portfolio management is a piece in the middle that is probably being experienced by most organizations we see today. It may be a permanent place that they're going to be because they recognize that there will always be some traditional PPM and more agile portfolio management, and they have to manage that diversity. Or it's a transitionary stage as it takes years to do a full agile transformation, and they'll have to be in an adaptive mode for some period of time. And that adaptive piece also factors in that not only different types of work, but also various portfolios in organizations. There's the project portfolios that we're talking about. There's program portfolios. There's IT service portfolios. There's product development portfolios. And these are just some of the things that we see. And to be able to accommodate all these different things and have a composite resource management focus is a challenge in organizations today. So when we talk about the solutions today, and we're going to show you OnePlan. OnePlan provides tools and capabilities that allows you to deal with each stage of this evolution, whether it be the more traditional PPM, the more adaptive, or the more full all the way to the left capabilities. And we're using some tool-based examples of Microsoft Project and PPM, Jira, Azure DevOps, and Project in the adaptive world, and then the more pure Agile, maybe using Jira and or Azure DevOps in those modes. So OnePlan really provides some really good pre-configured adaptive PPM solutions for the Microsoft Cloud. This example we see up here is really looking at some very Microsoft-centric type of approaches using Project for the web, Azure DevOps, all being fed into a centralized portfolio and enterprise solution at the top, connecting strategy and portfolios into the execution layer. And capabilities that it provides, if you look at the top level of the portfolio from the top down, there's portfolio planning in a variety of modes, resource planning, which is going to be our focus today, layered in with some of portfolio aspects, and then financial planning. But notice from the bottoms up from the work, it's rolling in potentially a variety of different work management tools that feed into these portfolios and feed into the resource aspects of what it is that we want to do. So today in our demonstration of OnePlan that Paul's going to get into, we're going to focus on resource planning and showing how we can do resources for individual projects, resource capacity across all things in the portfolio, possibly doing some portfolio analysis and what ifs, and then resource reporting and analytics that we get as a natural output of the process to do that. So without stealing his thunder, I didn't want to go too much into that aspect of it. But also we talked about this being built for the Microsoft Cloud. And this OnePlan solution we're going to show you today, we're going to show you primarily through the use of Microsoft Teams, but it can be surfaced anywhere in the Microsoft Cloud. It can be rendered in your use of Microsoft Teams, in your use of Project or Project Online. It can be rendered from within Azure DevOps or from within SharePoint. And Microsoft move into the Power Platform and Power Apps and Dynamics 365. It can also be surfaced in those areas as well. Just be apprised that OnePlan does what it does. It's how you consume it and what tool sets and what environments in your Microsoft Cloud that can vary from user base to user base. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Paul for a demonstration.
Thanks very much, Jim. I'm just going to try and share my screen. I've logged into our OnePlan environment, and as Jim just said, we're doing this demo today with inside Teams. So if you'll see there on the left, I'm in a team. It's called the Adaptive Portfolio Tree, just one of the many teams that we happen to have. And I have my OnePlan channel set up inside this team. So I'm going to expand my screen a little bit to make that a little easier to work, but I am inside the Teams framework today. I've logged in, and I'm going to walk through this from the perspective of 4 different types of users. The project manager is where I'm going to start. A bit of time on the portfolio manager, some time on the resource manager and what they can see and what data they have at their disposal. Back to the PM a little bit, just to take it to the next level, and then finish on what the executives can see in terms of dashboards and so forth. So right now I'm logged into my portfolio, and I flipped my view around because I want to just look at this from an effort summary. So you can see here that each project has a committed effort, a scheduled effort, and we're going to get into those concepts as we go during this demo. But I wanted to kind of give you that first view, one of many views that we'll play with. And now as a PM, I'm trying to manage and organize this social networking integration project. And I need to sort of organize and get structured around this, particularly as it relates to resource management. So when I log into this particular project, or I click through, I'm now in my resource plan. And here you can see we have a list of resources, and I can add others to my list. I'm looking at this over the next, 12 months, starting back in May, and looking at what I might need for resourcing. So this is capturing the demand. I'm expressing it in hours. I could do it in percents or an FTE if I wanted to. Hours to me makes the most sense, so I'm going to stick with that just because I can frame it in my head a little easier. And so what I'm looking at here is, where do I think I will need this role on this project? What is the expected demand? I'm not interested right now in the specific tasks. We're going to come back to that a little bit later and show how we go to that next layer. But this is, if you go back to some of the stuff Jim was just talking about, capturing that initial demand and understanding what your capacity is. I am comparing this to the capacity within the overall organization. And that's what's driving the color coding you're seeing on each of these things. If I hover over one, there's a lot of work being assigned to Ehrlich here in that particular month. So we're going to have to rectify that, and we'll see how the resource manager looks at that a bit later. What that's telling me, if I need this resource for 160 hours that month, there's a lot of other things already in place and in demand that may not make the most sense. I might want to look at someone else. I also have on here a mixture of generic resources where I might be defining, I'm going to need a business analyst. And when we get this project approved and moving forward, we're going to have to sub that through to a named individual. So I have these generic resources you can see here as business analyst, developer, project manager, and so forth. But I also have some named people. I can have people who are committed to the project, or I can have stuff that's proposed at this point. So this gives me as a PM the ability to document what it is I need for this project, when I think I'm going to need it, and to sketch it out and sort of plan it at the level of detail that I need for now. I don't need to build a detailed schedule to get this data. I could, but I can stick to this grid format and go and put the people on the team that I need. Okay. Now, if I jump back to the portfolio, I'm going to look at this from the portfolio manager's perspective. So imagine we're preparing for a bunch of projects, this being one of them. And now what we need to do is make some decisions regarding what we're going to do as an organization. So I'm going to switch my view around a little bit here for a second to a different view called prioritization. And now you can see as a portfolio manager, there's my list of projects. Some are active, some are proposed, some are on hold, and so forth. And here's how they've scored against the different strategic drivers that we captured. Is I now have my prioritized list, and I've clicked on this little prioritize button, and you can see over here I have the ability to take projects and move them up and down. And that may become very useful here in a minute as I make some decisions around what I'd like to do. What I'm really focused on and what I really wanted to get to here is, as a portfolio manager, and this was there was that triangular, the 4 square slide that Jim had, was don't do projects where you don't have resources, and which resources, what projects should you do. So let's take a look at that exact scenario. So now that I come in here, I'm pulling up my resource pool and how it relates to these projects. And right now, because I haven't picked up a particular scenario, everything is in play, everything is included. And you can see I've got some resourcing constraints up and down the portfolio that clearly tell me we can't do all of these projects given these constraints. So what can we do? So if I start knocking off some of the ones that are on hold and whatnot, and get rid of the ones down at the bottom, this will start to change. You'll see little bits of change. But if I come up here, maybe I start picking on some of the more top of the list projects here, you'll notice it changing even further. Now we've got this resource mostly resolved. We got a bit of an issue in September and a few other things, but we've started to fix it. My objective in this demo isn't to fully resolve it, but just to show you that capability, to start looking at, well, if I don't do this project or that proposed project, no, we can't go forward with that right now because we don't have headcount. And the other option I would have, if I come in here and I look at this from a Gantt chart perspective, I could grab a project and potentially move that project out. And that's going to start to move some things around for me. Again, if I move this one out a bit, now I've resolved some issues, but I've created a different one. So I have another layer of planning that I can do. I can first uncheck projects and say, not now, we don't have the headcount or the team or the key resources we need. Or I can manipulate the timing of a project, say if we start this later or potentially start it sooner and so forth. What does that do to my overall resource pool? Where does the hotspots change? And what am I left with? And once I was done doing that analysis, I could come up here under this and save as, and it could be today's demo scenario, for example. And that would be a working model that I could refer back to and make additional adjustments at a later date, or it can be the one that we move forward with. But we have this ability to save scenario after scenario as we look at these different things that we're trying to resolve. So having done that, now let's sort of fast forward. We've made some decisions. I saved that scenario. Let's say we're going to do the projects that remain checked out or checked into the model. Now, if I put on the hat of a resource manager, and with that resource manager, I want to look at my overall resource pool. Let me just pull that screen off for a second. This is what I'm dealing with. Now, I didn't save that scenario, so all those projects are still back in play. So I got lots of red, a few spots that are helpful, but I got lots of challenges here that I need to work through. And if we go and look at Ehrlich again, you can see all those different projects that Ehrlich's on, including the one that I was working on earlier. There's those 160 hours of all of the different things that this individual should be working on or is expected to work on. If I go under the generic resource developer, again, here you go, you can see the different things that we might have, we have scheduled for a developer, but we haven't yet staffed the project. So now I want to look at my resource pool and say, well, who can fill some of these objectives? So if I go and look at find resources by role, let's go look for that developer, okay? And what I want to do is I want to say, well, this particular task, I'm going to assign to Kono, and I'm going to say replace. And now that task has been put onto Kono. Obviously, I caused a different problem. I'm going to have to resolve that at as we get going on this planning. But this is how, as a resource manager, when I'm asked the question, who is the developer that can go onto this project? This capability here, all of this rich data, gives me that ability to analyze my resource pool, see where I've got these conflicts, try and resolve them with the team that I have, move some projects around, and start assigning the work to the various resources that we have in the team. So that's what the resource manager is given in terms of capability and functionality. Now let's jump back to the project manager and spend a bit more time on that. Let me just get rid of some of the stuff here. And I'm going to go to my VoIP phone project. And I want to look at some different information here. There's my resource plan. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I want to start with my work plan. Jim talked a lot about this towards the end of the slide presentation, the ability to use a different tool of choice and be able to aggregate that information. This particular project we see here was originally created in Project Professional. Other projects in that list I just came from come from DevOps, some come from Jira, some come from Project for the Web. The goal here is use that tool that you want to, but when it comes to doing the resource management and some of the other capabilities, we can bring you to a common, consistent playing field and allow you to work from there. So on this particular project that I'm now doing the detailed scheduling exercise, in this case it's in the project desktop, you can see here I've got my different tasks and resources that have been assigned to them. And Yan Yang is on this particular task. And that's all been done through Project Pro. And I can see it here. And it's going to roll up to my overall resourcing and that analysis we just did. So what I want to look at next is that resource. Oh, wait, sorry, wrong thing. I'm going to come back to that one second. I have one more thing I wanted to show here. So now I can look at this from a schedule perspective and pull it in. And you can see here, this is Jan's tasks, great. Let's go to developer again. You can see we've got a couple of tasks yet on our project that we need to staff. But here's what I want to know as a PM. My project team may not be, and often wouldn't be, unique to my project. And you can see there's a red here, so something's going on. So I'm going to click on show all work. This takes a second. It's going to go out to the server and say, all right, what's the full picture? What's everything that's impacting my project and across the whole organization? That particular month is red, and it's red for a reason. And ta-da, now we know what it is. That particular developer resource, and that's a generic one, so this would make sense, has a whole bunch of work on different projects. So this gives us that line of sight. And if I go down to Ehrlich, if anyone knows Silicon Valley, that's where that character comes from, you'll see that there are competing interests and competing projects. AI for remote weather stations is the project that they're on when they're supposed to be working on mine. So I have that line of sight to not just my own team and what its conflicts are from the schedule that I am managing, in this case in Project Pro, but I also have that rich data across the whole organization surfaced here. That remote for weather stations project could be in DevOps, could be in Project for the Web, could be in Jira, I don't know. But I know what its resourcing requirements are because they're being aggregated and shown and managed here. Now I'm going to go back to what I keep kind of clicking to a little too quickly, is to look at my resourcing. So when we started this project, we had set up some commitments for what we wanted, what we expected people to be doing on this project. You look across that PM line across the top, 10 hours in June, pretty much full time in July. And if we go down to Galvin, down a couple rows down, 64 hours was expected in July, but based on the schedule, we're actually at 80. So the schedule, either because some tasks got delayed, some tasks are running long, we actually have a commitment there that exceeds what our original commitment was. We have a schedule rather that's exceeding that. And that's going to be an impact not only to this project potentially, but across the whole resource pool, because people were expecting 64 hours, but that the remaining hours were available to other work. And now that's not necessarily the case. So it gives the PM that visibility that we're running hot on some of these resources, things aren't lining up to where we thought they would be, and we need to sort of take some corrective action. This rich interface gives us other compares. If we are doing timesheets, so we could see what was committed versus what was entered in the timesheets, and whether we want to see that as to over or under, we got both options, and likewise with the schedule, or go back to where I started and look at this versus capacity. So very rich data for a PM to start making some decisions on what is happening to their resource pool and where people are being pulled and how they're being used and how is the schedule progressing against what was originally planned. Now I'm going to kind of wrap this demo up here with a quick look at the dashboard capability. So with all of this rich data, I'm going to jump over to Power BI, so I'm going to log in. And here we go. I'm going to jump down to my resource dashboard. So we built into this tool a series of dashboards and reports through Power BI that give us that rich data now surfaced. So as an executive, and I need to make some executive decisions that might be related to hiring, that might be related to projects that are in trouble, and I may see some of that data come through the resource dashboard with, a lot of extra burn and so forth. This gives me that rich analytics capability at the top to say, where am I? What's going on? What roles are impacting our ability to deliver, our ability to react to the business, to be agile? Do we need to hire? Where are the big uses of resources? All of that type of analysis, we leverage the Power BI and the Power Platform to deliver that rich data here. Jim, that's everything I wanted to show.
All right, well, terrific. Thank you for the wonderful demo. Let me take back. All right, let's summarize and wrap up. So, in summary, we talked about resource management. We talked about the factoring in of the adaptive PPM solution, and what Paul was showing was at the portfolio level that no matter how many different execution tools we have for the scheduling piece feeding in, or the backlogs for the agile piece that are feeding in, we can have one resource management process and one resource management tool for doing our capacity planning, et cetera, across all of that, while yet feeding in the execution schedule data that he showed you as far as rolling up and comparing scheduled versus committed information. So in summary today, resource management really is a critical success factor for overall PPM success. And our approaches and our processes should align with our organizational readiness and maturity. Let's be honest with ourselves where we're at and put a plan in place to do that. High-level capacity planning, like we showed here today, is a really good place to start because it's probably the most achievable early on. And then more detailed resource allocation can follow as you're ready for it or if it's needed by your organization. Hopefully we showed you today that OnePlan provides a great platform for all of your PPM capabilities, and it can extend existing solutions to provide enhanced planning and visuals on those capabilities, regardless of other tools that you're using at the execution level. It enhances all aspects of top-down strategic planning and analysis. We showed some portfolio what if along with the resource capacity planning. So hopefully we saw that. What we didn't show today is that there's a financial aspect of that that actually comes into play as well. And OnePlan is fully integrated and embedded into the Microsoft Cloud. So as you want to surface it, we were showing it in Teams today, but we can also surface that in your other Microsoft tools that you're looking for today because it's fully embedded in that Microsoft environment. A little bit about us. OnePlan is brought to you by Wickersoft. We are a multi-gold certified Microsoft partner with a particular passion for project and portfolio management disciplines and extending that to overall work management. We help people get the most out of their investments in these technologies, and we are a global company of significance. Now, we do have technical advisory services, and we can support you on this stuff to the degree you want to be helped. We can help with implementation services on overall solutions. We can provide an education and training on the technology as well as on the disciplines. We can support you ongoing to whatever degree you'd like support and handholding as you evolve into these things. And we provide advisory services, especially if you're trying to do things like mature your PMO or your resource management disciplines or become more agile as you're going through a transformation. We can help you and guide you through that as well. So we can help you to the degree that you would like to be helped. As far as next steps and things that you might want to consider after this, we do offer a free roadmap workshop to help review your current use of solution and tools and assess the current requirements and whatever desired future state you'd like to get to, and determine how to implement or migrate into a new solution. What would it take to do that? And maybe propose a roadmap for the best adoption success that you should consider, and give you an idea what it would cost to do so. And we're happy to do that with you after this webinar if you'd like to reach out to us. We also have trial environments, meaning that we have trials that are available up on Microsoft's AppSource. And the adaptive project portfolio management template that's out there is available for limited trials. And we can help you with that and chaperone you through that and help you get the most value out of your evaluation of the tool set. So from a next steps perspective, the roadmap workshop, you can try for a trial, and we're happy to chaperone you with some Wickersoft support on that. Or if you're not even there yet and you saw this generalized demo and you want to learn more, we can actually do a more personalized one-on-one demo for your organization in the context of what your requirements and what your landscape is. If you'd like to do that, just feel free to contact us at contact@oneplan.ai, or you can reach out to me, Jim Patterson, at jpatterson@oneplan.ai if you want to get me directly, but the general email will get you contacted by the appropriate people. We do these webinars all the time. We have on-demand, pre-recorded ones that we've done prior, and a list of upcoming webinars you can register at oneplan.ai/webinar. So monitor that and feel free to take a look at what we've already done and see what's upcoming you might want to register for. The next webinar we have up is on next Thursday at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be program and project financial management in an adaptive project and portfolio management world. So we're going to be talking about the financial management aspect of some of the things that we talked about today in more detail. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention today. Appreciate that you took valuable time out of your day to visit with us. And please reach out to us. We'd love to engage with you and see how we can help you advance in these disciplines. Have a great day.